The morning sky hung heavy and ominous over the Kansas prairie, a sickly yellow-green that made Mary Catherine O'Malley's stomach clench with familiar dread. She'd seen skies like this before during the terrible summer 2 years ago when dust storms had buried crops and livestock, when families had loaded their belongings into wagons and headed back east. Defeated by the relentless fury of nature, Mary Catherine stood on the front porch of her small sod house, one hand shading her eyes as she scanned the horizon, the other unconsciously smoothing her faded blue dress. At 26, she was still young, but the prairie had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with years. Her auburn hair, once her pride, was now kept in a practical bun, and her green eyes held the wariness of someone who had learned that disaster could strike without warning. Behind her, in the modest interior of their home, she could hear her children playing 7-year-old Timothy building elaborate cities with wooden blocks, and 4-year-old Emma singing softly to her corn-husk doll. The sounds should have brought comfort, but today they only heightened Mary Catherine's anxiety. The children were her world, her responsibility, her reason for staying on this harsh land when every instinct told her to pack up and return to the safety of her family in Illinois. "Mama?" Timothy appeared in the doorway, his sandy hair tousled and his blue eyes bright with curiosity. "Is there going to be a storm?" Mary Catherine forced a smile, the expression feeling stiff on her face. "Maybe, sweetheart. We'll just have to keep an eye on the sky and be ready if the weather turns bad." Timothy nodded solemnly, old beyond his years in the way that prairie children often were. "Should I bring in more firewood?" Papa always said to be prepared. The mention of his father made Mary Catherine's chest tighten with grief and pride in equal measure. Patrick O'Malley had been dead 18 months now, taken by pneumonia during the worst winter anyone could remember, but his influence lived on in the practical wisdom he'd passed to his son. "That's a good idea, Timothy. But stay close to the house, and come inside immediately if the wind picks up." As Timothy scampered off to gather wood, Mary Catherine returned her attention to the threatening sky. The air was eerily still, pregnant with the kind of tension that preceded nature's most violent displays. In the distance, she could see a dark wall building on the horizon, not clouds, but something far worse: dust. Tons and tons of precious topsoil picked up by wind and transformed into a choking, blinding monster that could bury a homestead in hours. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn, relief flooding through her as she recognized a familiar figure riding hard toward her property. Lucas Brennan, a cowboy who worked for the Hartwell Ranch about 10 miles south, was pushing his horse at a gallop, his usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious urgency. Lucas was a man of 32 who carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced prairie dangers and survived them. His dark hair was perpetually wind-blown, and his gray eyes held the steady alertness of someone who made his living reading weather patterns and animal behavior. Mary Catherine had met him in town several times, always finding him courteous and respectful, though she'd sensed a loneliness in him that matched her own. "Mrs. O'Malley," Lucas called as he reined in his horse near her gate. "You need to get your children and take shelter immediately. There's a duster coming, bigger than anything I've seen in 5 years." Mary Catherine's heart began to race. "How long do we have?" Lucas dismounted quickly, his movements sharp with urgency. "Maybe an hour, maybe less. The wind's picking up speed, and that wall of dust is moving faster than a locomotive." He gestured toward the horizon where the dark mass had grown noticeably larger even in the few minutes they'd been talking. "Ma'am, I know this isn't proper, but I'd like to stay and help you weather this. A storm this size. It's not safe to face alone with children." Mary Catherine's first instinct was to refuse. She'd worked hard to maintain her reputation as a respectable widow, and having an unmarried man in her home overnight, which this storm would certainly require, could cause talk that would follow her family for years. But as she looked at the approaching wall of dust, now stretching across the entire western horizon like the wrath of God made visible, practical considerations overrode social ones. Timothy and Emma were depending on her to keep them safe, and Lucas Brennan knew more about surviving prairie storms than she ever would. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, please stay. We'll need all the help we can get." Lucas nodded curtly and began unloading supplies from his saddlebags, extra rope, canvas tarps, and what looked like enough food and water for several days. "First thing we need to do is get your animals secured. That chicken coop won't survive winds like these are going to bring." As if summoned by his words, Timothy appeared around the corner of the house, his arms full of firewood, and his eyes wide with excitement and fear as he took in the approaching storm. "Mama, The chickens are acting strange. They keep trying to huddle under the house. Smart birds, Lucas said, tipping his hat to the boy. You must be Timothy. Your mama's told me about you in town. I'm Lucas Brennan, and I'm going to help your family ride out this storm. Timothy studied Lucas with the careful assessment that Prairie children learned early. Are you going to stay here? With us? If your mama says it's all right. Storms like this one can last for days, and it's safer if we all stick together. Mary Catherine watched the exchange between her son and Lucas, noting the respect in Lucas's voice as he spoke to Timothy, the way he didn't talk down to the boy or dismiss his concerns. Patrick had always said you could judge a man's character by how he treated children and animals, and Lucas was clearly passing that test. Timothy, run inside and tell Emma we're going to have a visitor for a few days. Help her gather her favorite things and bring them to the storm cellar. We'll be spending some time down there. As Timothy raced inside to follow his mother's instructions, Lucas turned to Mary Catherine with an expression of grim determination. Ma'am, I won't lie to you. This is going to be rough, but we'll get through it, all of us. I promise you that. Mary Catherine looked into his steady gray eyes and felt some of her fear ease. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. I don't know what we would have done without your help. Let's focus on preparation now and gratitude later, Lucas said with a slight smile that transformed his weathered face. We've got work to do. The next hour passed in a blur of frantic activity as they prepared for the storm's arrival. Lucas worked with the efficiency of someone who had faced nature's fury before, securing Mary Catherine's few animals in the root cellar beneath the house, reinforcing the storm shutters Patrick had installed years ago, and helping Timothy and Emma carry essential supplies to the small storm shelter Patrick had dug behind the house. Mary Catherine marveled at how naturally Lucas seemed to understand what needed to be done. He didn't take over or push her aside, but instead worked alongside her as if they'd been preparing for storms together for years. When Emma grew frightened by the increasingly violent wind, Lucas knelt down to her level and explained in gentle terms what was happening, comparing the dust storm to a giant wave that they would ride out safely in their underground boat. Will the chickens be all right? Emma asked, clutching her doll tightly as the first gusts of wind began to rattle the windows. They'll be fine, sweetheart, Lucas assured her. Chickens are smart about storms. They know how to hunker down and wait for the danger to pass. By the time the wall of dust reached their homestead, they were as ready as they could be. Mary Catherine gathered her children in the storm cellar, a small underground room Patrick had excavated during their first year on the prairie, while Lucas made final checks on their supplies and the security of their shelter. The storm hit with a fury that defied description. One moment they could see across the prairie, and the next they were enveloped in a brown darkness so complete it seemed like the end of the world. The wind howled like a living thing, driving dust through every crack and crevice, turning the air itself into something hostile and choking. In the storm cellar, lit by the dim glow of a kerosene lamp, Mary Catherine held Emma close while Timothy pressed against her other side. The sound above them was terrifying, a constant roar punctuated by crashes as debris struck their house, the screaming of wind that seemed to go on forever. How long will it last? Timothy asked, his voice barely audible over the storm's fury. Lucas, who was monitoring their supplies and checking the cellar's ventilation, looked up from his work. Could be hours, could be days. These big dusters sometimes last for the better part of a week. But we're prepared, and we're safe down here. Emma began to cry softly, overwhelmed by the noise and darkness. Without hesitation, Lucas moved to sit beside the little family, his presence somehow making the small space feel less claustrophobic. Would you like to hear a story? He asked Emma gently. I know some good ones about brave princesses and magical horses. Emma nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Lucas launched into an elaborate tale about a princess who rode a flying horse through dangerous storms to rescue villages from an evil sorcerer. His voice was warm and animated, bringing the characters to life in a way that captured both children's complete attention. Mary Catherine found herself as entranced as her children by Lucas's storytelling. She watched his face in the lamplight, noting the way his eyes crinkled with humor, the gentle expressions that crossed his features as he described the princess's adventures. There was something deeply attractive about a man who could comfort frightened children, who could create wonder and magic in the midst of terror. As the hours passed and the storm continued to rage overhead, they settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Lucas told stories and played simple games with the children, helped Mary Catherine organize their supplies, and maintained the lamp and ventilation system with the competence of someone who understood survival. Mr. Brennan, Timothy said during a lull in the wind. Have you ever been in a storm this bad before? A few times, Lucas admitted. The prairie can be a harsh place, but it's also beautiful when the weather's calm. You learn to respect both sides of it. Papa used to say the land would provide for us if we were patient and worked hard, Timothy offered. Lucas nodded seriously. Your papa was a smart man. The land does provide, but it also tests you. Storms like this, they're part of that test. Mary Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the reverent way Lucas spoke about Patrick, how he honored her late husband's memory instead of dismissing it. Too many people seemed to think that because Patrick was gone, everything he'd believed and taught should be forgotten as well. As night fell and the storm continued its assault, they shared a simple meal of bread and preserves from Mary Catherine's carefully hoarded supplies. The intimate setting, 4 people huddled together in a small underground space, sharing food by lamplight while nature raged overhead, created a sense of closeness that transcended their brief acquaintance. Mrs. O'Malley, Lucas said as they prepared to settle in for the night, I want you to know that I'll do everything in my power to keep you and your children safe. You have my word on that. Mary Catherine looked at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayer, who had taken responsibility for her family's welfare without being asked, who had turned a terrifying experience into something bearable through his competence and kindness. Thank you, she said softly. I believe you. As they arranged their makeshift beds in the confined space, Mary Catherine realized that something had shifted in her understanding of what was possible. For 18 months, she'd faced every challenge alone, convinced that independence was her only option. But Lucas's presence reminded her that there could be strength in partnership, safety in shared responsibility. The storm continued to howl overhead, but in their small underground sanctuary, Mary Catherine allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced since Patrick's death. The comfort of knowing someone else was watching over her children. The relief of sharing her burdens with someone capable and caring. It was a dangerous feeling. She knew. But as she listened to Lucas's quiet breathing in the darkness, as she felt the solid reassurance of his presence just a few feet away, Mary Catherine couldn't bring herself to regret the gratitude and something deeper that was growing in her heart. The second day of the storm brought a temporary lull that allowed them to venture briefly above ground, to assess the damage and gather additional supplies. The world that greeted them was alien and terrifying, a landscape transformed by millions of tons of displaced soil that had buried fence posts, formed drifts against buildings, and turned familiar landmarks into unrecognizable mounds of earth. Dear God, Mary Catherine whispered, staring at her chicken coop, which was buried up to its roofline. How will we ever dig out from all this? Lucas surveyed the devastation with the practiced eye of someone who had seen nature's destruction before. It looks worse than it is, he said reassuringly. The wind's the dangerous part, the dust we can deal with once the storm passes completely. The important thing is that your house is still standing, and your family is safe. Timothy stood beside his mother, his young face solemn as he took in the changed landscape. Will our garden grow back, Mama? Mary Catherine felt her throat tighten as she looked at where her carefully tended vegetable garden had been. Months of work, their winter food supply, the crops that meant the difference between staying on their land and giving up all of it, was buried under feet of dust. We'll plant again come spring, she said firmly, as much to convince herself as her son. The soil is still there underneath, just rearranged a bit. Lucas caught her eye over Timothy's head and nodded approvingly at her optimistic response. Your mama's right, Timothy, and I'll bet there are seeds and roots that survived under all that dust. Prairie plants are tougher than they look. They worked quickly to gather what they could before the wind picked up again, more water from the well, additional food from the house, and blankets to make their underground shelter more comfortable. Lucas also retrieved his guitar from his saddlebags, explaining that music could help pass the long hours when they were confined below ground. You play guitar? Emma asked with delight as they settled back into the storm cellar just as the wind began to howl again. A little, Lucas said modestly, tuning the instrument by ear despite the noise from above. My mother insisted I learn when I was about your brother's age, said music was good for the soul. As the storm raged overhead with renewed fury, Lucas played gentle melodies that somehow made their small underground world feel less like a prison and more like a cozy refuge. He taught the children simple songs, showed Timothy basic chord progressions, and even coaxed Mary Catherine into humming along with tunes she remembered from her childhood. You have a beautiful voice, Lucas observed after Mary Catherine had sung a lullaby to help Emma fall asleep. Do you play any instruments? Mary Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. I used to play piano before I married Patrick and came west, but there wasn't room for a piano in our wagon, and we could never afford to buy one out here. Maybe someday, Lucas said quietly, and something in his tone made Mary Catherine look at him more closely. There was a thoughtfulness in his expression, as if he were considering possibilities that extended far beyond the current storm. On the third day, as they shared their dwindling supplies and listened to the wind that seemed determined to blow forever, Lucas began telling Mary Catherine and the children about his own life. He'd been born in Missouri, he explained, the youngest of 4 children whose parents had lost their farm to bad weather and debt when he was 16. I came west looking for work and a chance to start over, he said, his fingers picking out a soft melody on the guitar. Been working ranches for almost 15 years now, saving money and learning everything I could about cattle and land management. Do you want your own ranch someday? Timothy asked with the direct curiosity of childhood. Lucas glanced at Mary Catherine before answering. I do. I've been looking at land, making plans, but a ranch isn't much good without. He paused, seeming to reconsider his words. Without the right reasons to build something lasting. Mary Catherine felt her pulse quicken at the unfinished thought. Was Lucas suggesting what she thought he was suggesting? And if so, how did she feel about the possibility? As the storm continued into its 4th day, their small underground world took on the intimacy of a shared experience that would bond them forever. They'd seen each other at their worst, tired, dirty, worried, and scared, but also at their best, as they worked together to keep the children calm and entertained, to maintain hope in the face of nature's assault. Mary Catherine found herself noticing things about Lucas that had nothing to do with his competence in crisis. The way he listened to Timothy's endless questions with genuine interest, the gentle patience he showed when Emma grew fretful and demanding, the respect he showed for Patrick's memory, often asking the children about their father and encouraging them to share stories about him. Mr. Brennan, Emma said on their 4th afternoon underground, when the storm is over, will you go away? Lucas looked at Mary Catherine before answering, and she saw uncertainty in his gray eyes. I don't know, sweetheart. That depends on a lot of things. I don't want you to go away, Emma declared with 4-year-old directness. I like having you here. You tell good stories and you make Mama smile. Mary Catherine felt her cheeks burn at her daughter's innocent observation. It was true she had been smiling more in the past few days than she had in months. But was it just relief at having help during the crisis? Or something deeper? That evening, as the children slept and she and Lucas sat together listening to the wind, Mary Catherine found the courage to voice what had been growing in her heart. Lucas, she said quietly, when this storm is over, when you go back to your life at the ranch, will we see you again? Lucas set down his guitar and turned to face her in the dim lamplight. Do you want to see me again? Mary Catherine's heart hammered as she considered her answer. This man had risked his own safety to help her family. He'd turned a terrifying experience into something bearable through his kindness and competence. He'd shown her children the kind of masculine guidance and protection they'd been missing since their father's death. More than that, he'd reminded her that she was more than just a widow and mother, that she was a woman capable of feeling attraction, companionship, and the stirring of emotions she'd thought were buried with Patrick. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I would like that very much. Lucas's smile in the lamplight was answer enough, but he spoke anyway. Then you will. Whatever it takes, however we need to arrange it properly, you will. On the 5th morning, Mary Catherine woke to the most beautiful sound she'd heard in days' silence. The wind had finally died, and the constant roar that had been their companion for nearly a week was replaced by the blessed quiet of a prairie morning. Lucas was already awake, checking their supplies and monitoring the air quality with the caution of someone who knew that dust storms could resume without warning. When he was satisfied that the danger had truly passed, he carefully opened the cellar door and climbed up to survey the aftermath. It's safe to come up, he called down to them after a few minutes. The storms moved on. The world that greeted them was both devastating and strangely beautiful. The morning sun illuminated a landscape transformed by millions of tons of redistributed earth, creating strange new hills and valleys where none had existed before. Mary Catherine's house was largely intact, though its walls were scoured by wind and half buried by drifted soil. Her barn had lost part of its roof, and her garden was completely buried, but the basic structures of her homestead had survived. Oh, Emma breathed. staring at the transformed landscape with wonder rather than fear. It looks like a different world. In some ways, it is, Lucas agreed, lifting the little girl so she could see over the dust drifts. But underneath all this soil, everything that matters is still there. It just needs to be uncovered. Timothy was already exploring, climbing over dust drifts and marveling at how the familiar landmarks of his world had been changed. Mama, look, the fence is completely buried, but the posts are still there. See the tops? Mary Catherine surveyed the scope of the cleanup that awaited them and felt momentarily overwhelmed. How could one woman with 2 small children possibly dig out from this much devastation? The practical part of her mind began calculating the cost of hiring help, the time it would take to restore basic function to the homestead, the very real possibility that this disaster might force them to give up and move back east. As if reading her thoughts, Lucas appeared at her side. "It's not as bad as it looks," he said quietly. "Most of this dust will redistribute naturally with the next few rains, and I'll help you with the heavy work clearing the well, digging out the chicken coop, restoring the garden area." Mary Catherine turned to look at him. This man who continued to offer help without being asked, who seemed to consider her problems his own responsibility. "Lucas, you have your own job, your own life. I can't ask you to spend weeks helping us dig out." "You're not asking," Lucas pointed out with a slight smile. "I'm offering. And I've already spoken to Mr. Hartwell about taking some time to help folks recover from the storm. He understands that neighbors take care of neighbors out here." The simple word neighbors carried weight that Mary Catherine couldn't ignore. Lucas wasn't just talking about temporary assistance, he was positioning himself as someone with a long-term interest in her family's welfare. Over the next several days, Lucas proved as good as his word. He worked from dawn to dusk helping Mary Catherine restore basic function to her homestead. Together they cleared the well, dug out the chicken coop and found all her chickens alive and unharmed, and began the enormous task of clearing dust from her house and outbuildings. But more than the practical help, Lucas provided something Mary Catherine hadn't realized she'd been missing: adult companionship and shared purpose. Working alongside someone who understood the challenges of prairie life, who could anticipate what needed to be done without lengthy explanations, reminded her of the partnership she'd shared with Patrick. Yet it was different too. Where Patrick had been steady and practical, Lucas brought a sense of optimism and possibility that lifted Mary Catherine's spirits even in the face of overwhelming work. He found humor in small victories, celebrated progress that might have seemed insignificant to others, and somehow made the backbreaking labor feel manageable. "You're good with them," Mary Catherine observed one evening as she watched Lucas help Timothy repair a toy that had been damaged during the storm. "With the children, I mean." Lucas looked up from the wooden horse he was carving to replace Timothy's broken toy. "They're good children. Credit to their raising. They've taken to you remarkably quickly. Usually Timothy is much more reserved with strangers. Maybe I don't feel like a stranger anymore," Lucas suggested gently. "To any of you." Mary Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implied intimacy of his words. It was true. After spending 5 days together in the storm cellar, after working side by side to rebuild her homestead, Lucas did feel like family rather than a stranger. But the implications of that familiarity were both thrilling and terrifying. "Lucas," she said carefully, "I need you to understand something about my situation. I'm not just a woman who's free to make choices about her future. I'm a mother with 2 children who depend on me. Any decisions I make have to consider their welfare first." Lucas set down his carving and gave her his full attention. "I understand that, Mary Catherine, and I want you to know that if when I think about a future that includes you, it includes Timothy and Emma as well. They're part of you, and they'd be part of any life we might build together." The casual way he spoke of a life we might build together made Mary Catherine's heart race. Was he seriously considering a future with her? And if so, was she ready to consider such a possibility? "What exactly are you saying, Lucas?" Lucas was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'm saying that this week has shown me something I've been looking for without realizing it. I've been saving money to buy land, making plans to start a ranch, but I never had a clear picture of why I wanted those things until now. And now? Now I can picture a house with children's laughter in it, a woman who shares the work and the worries, a family that makes all the hard work worthwhile." Lucas met her eyes directly. "I can picture you, Mary Catherine. You and Timothy and Emma, building something lasting together. Mary Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the beautiful vision he painted. Lucas, I care about you more than I thought I could care about anyone after Patrick. But marriage, that's a huge step. And there would be talk. Let them talk, Lucas said firmly. We're both adults who understand what we want. Your husband's been gone over a year. You've proven you can manage on your own. And anyone with eyes can see that you're a woman of character and strength. But what about love? Mary Catherine asked quietly. I loved Patrick, deeply, completely. I don't know if I'm capable of that kind of feeling again. Lucas reached across the space between them and took her hand gently. I'm not asking you to love me the way you loved Patrick. That was a different time, a different person, a different kind of love. What I'm asking is whether you think you could love me as I am, for who we are together. Mary Catherine looked down at their joined hands, feeling the calloused strength of his fingers, the warmth that radiated from his touch. Did she love Lucas Brennan? She respected him, was grateful to him, felt attracted to him both physically and emotionally. But was that love? I don't know, she said honestly. But I think I'd like to find out. Lucas's courtship of Mary Catherine began the following week, with a formality that respected both her position as a widow and the scrutiny that any relationship would attract in their small community. He started visiting on Sunday afternoons, bringing small gifts for the children and staying for dinner before riding back to the Hartwell Ranch. The arrangement was proper and gradually introduced the community to the idea that the widow O'Malley and the Cowboy Brennan were developing a friendship that might become something more. Mary Catherine found herself looking forward to these visits with an anticipation that surprised her. Lucas had a way of making ordinary Sunday afternoons feel special, bringing Timothy books about horses and ranching, teaching Emma to braid wildflowers into crowns, helping Mary Catherine with projects around the homestead that required masculine strength and skill. He's nice, Emma announced one evening after Lucas had left, her simple assessment carrying the weight of childhood honesty. He makes you laugh, Mama. It was true. Mary Catherine realized she'd been laughing more since Lucas had entered their lives, finding joy in small moments and feeling optimistic about the future in ways she hadn't since Patrick's death. Do you like Mr. Brennan? She asked her children, testing their feelings about the growing relationship. He knows a lot about horses, Timothy said seriously, and he listens when I talk about Papa, without getting that sad look that other grown-ups get. Emma nodded emphatically. And he fixed my doll's dress when it got torn. And he didn't say it was silly girl stuff like some men do. Their easy acceptance of Lucas gave Mary Catherine courage to explore her own feelings more deeply. Was what she felt for him truly love, or simply gratitude and affection? And did it matter, as long as they could build a good life together? The question became more pressing when Lucas arrived one Sunday in October with news that would change everything. I've been offered a chance to buy the Henderson place, he announced over dinner, his voice carefully neutral despite the obvious importance of the news. Old Mr. Henderson is moving to California to live with his daughter, and he's willing to sell to me at a fair price. Mary Catherine felt her heart skip. The Henderson place was only 5 miles from her homestead, good land with a solid house, established outbuildings, and a reliable water source. If Lucas bought it, he'd be her neighbor permanently, not just a visitor from a distant ranch. That's wonderful news, she said, though she wondered if her voice sounded as strained to Lucas as it did to her own ears. You've wanted your own place for so long. The thing is, Lucas continued, watching her face carefully, it's a lot of land for one man to work alone, and the house is bigger than I need for a bachelor. It seems like the kind of place that would benefit from, he paused, seeming to gather courage, from a family. Timothy looked up from his meal with bright interest. Are you going to get married, Mr. Brennan? Lucas's eyes never left Mary Catherine's face. I hope so, Timothy. If the right woman would have me. Mary Catherine felt the weight of his unspoken proposal settling around her like a blanket. This was it, the moment when she had to decide whether to step forward into a new life or remain safely in the familiar territory of widowhood. Lucas, she said carefully, are you asking me to marry you? I am, he said simply. I'm asking you to marry me, to bring Timothy and Emma and make a home with me on the Henderson place. I'm asking you to let me be a husband to you and a father to your children. The words hung in the air like a promise and a challenge. Mary Catherine looked around her small kitchen, at the children who were watching this adult conversation with keen interest, at the man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she hadn't known she was praying. What about the practical considerations? She asked, stalling for time to process the magnitude of what he was offering. People will expect a proper engagement period, and there's this homestead to consider. We can do everything properly, Lucas assured her. A suitable engagement period, a church wedding, all the social conventions observed. As for this place, we could keep it as additional grazing land or sell it to fund improvements to the Henderson property, whatever makes the most sense for our family's future. Our family, Mary Catherine repeated, testing the words. If you'll have me, Lucas said quietly. If you're willing to take the risk of building something new together. Mary Catherine looked at her children, seeing hope and excitement in their young faces. She thought about the long winter evenings ahead, the challenges of managing her homestead alone, the loneliness that had become her constant companion since Patrick's death. Then she thought about the past weeks, the storm that had thrown them together, the work they'd shared, the easy companionship that had developed between them. She thought about Lucas's kindness to her children, his respect for Patrick's memory, his steady strength in the face of crisis. Was it love? Perhaps not the passionate, all-consuming love she'd shared with Patrick in their youth, but it was something real and solid and good affection, respect, attraction, and the foundation for something that could grow into deep and lasting love. Yes, she said quietly, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. Yes, Lucas, I'll marry you. Lucas's smile was brilliant, transforming his weathered face with joy. Really? You're sure? I'm sure, Mary Catherine said, and realized she truly was. I'm ready to take the risk of happiness again. Timothy and Emma erupted in excited chatter, full of questions about when the wedding would be, whether they could help plan it, and what it would be like to live on the Henderson place. Lucas answered their questions patiently while Mary Catherine sat in wonder at how quickly her life had changed direction. That evening, after Lucas had left and the children were in bed, Mary Catherine stood on her front porch looking out over the prairie that had tested her so severely and ultimately brought her the gift of new love. The land that had buried her garden and threatened her family had also delivered Lucas Brennan to her door, proving once again that the prairie gave as much as it took from those brave enough to call it home. The engagement period that followed was a whirlwind of preparation and adjustment for both families. Mary Catherine found herself navigating the delicate social dynamics of a small prairie community, where her engagement to Lucas was generally celebrated, but also carefully scrutinized for propriety and appropriateness. You're doing the right thing, declared Mrs. Patterson, the closest thing the area had to a social arbiter, during a visit to discuss wedding plans. That man is solid as bedrock, and those children need a father's guidance. Patrick would want you to be happy. The endorsement from Mrs. Patterson carried significant weight in their community, and Mary Catherine felt grateful for the older woman's support. But she also recognized that marrying Lucas would mean taking on new social obligations and expectations that went beyond her current role as an independent widow. Lucas, for his part, threw himself into preparing the Henderson place for his new family with an enthusiasm that warmed Mary Catherine's heart. He spent every spare moment improving the house, reinforcing the outbuildings, and planning modifications that would accommodate 2 additional children and a woman who would need space for her own interests and activities. I'm having a special room built off the kitchen, he told Mary Catherine during one of his Sunday visits. Somewhere you could do your sewing and letter writing, maybe even set up a small business if you wanted to take in work from neighboring families. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, recognizing that she might want to maintain some economic independence even after marriage, touched Mary Catherine deeply. Lucas wasn't trying to absorb her identity into his own, but rather create space for her to flourish as an individual within their partnership. As winter approached and their Christmas wedding drew near, Mary Catherine found herself falling in love with Lucas in small daily increments. The way he remembered Timothy's interest in a particular book and brought it from town. The patience he showed when Emma insisted on helping with projects that would have been much easier to complete alone. The respect he showed for her opinions when they discussed modifications to their future home. Are you happy, Mama? Emma asked one snowy December evening as they worked together on Mary Catherine's wedding dress, a simple but elegant blue wool that would serve her well in her new role as a rancher's wife. Mary Catherine considered the question seriously. Was she happy? The past months had been challenging in many ways, requiring her to navigate new emotions while managing the practical realities of merging 2 lives into one family. Yes, sweetheart, she said finally. I am happy. Different than I was with Papa, but happy in a new way. Will Mr. Brennan be our Papa now? Mary Catherine set down her needle and pulled Emma onto her lap. He'll be your stepfather, which means he'll love you and take care of you like a papa would. But your real papa will always be Patrick O'Malley, and no one will ever try to replace him." Emma nodded solemnly. "Timothy says Mr. Brennan told him that having two papas to remember makes him extra lucky, not sad." The wisdom of Lucas's words to her son brought tears to Mary Catherine's eyes. This man who had entered their lives during a crisis continued to prove himself worthy of their trust and love through countless small acts of understanding and kindness. The wedding took place on the 23rd of December in the small community church, with what seemed like half the county in attendance despite the bitter cold. Mary Catherine walked down the aisle escorted by Timothy, who took his role as man of the family seriously, while Emma served as flower girl, scattering precious hothouse rose petals that Lucas had somehow procured from the nearest city. Lucas stood at the altar in his best suit, his gray eyes warm with love and promise as Mary Catherine approached. When the minister asked if he would take Mary Catherine as his wife, to love and cherish her children as his own, Lucas's voice rang clear and strong through the small church. "I will, with all my heart." Mary Catherine's own vows were equally heartfelt, promising not just to be Lucas's wife but to build with him a home filled with love, respect, and the kind of partnership that honored both their individual strengths and their shared dreams. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas's kiss was gentle but filled with promise for the future they would build together. The congregation erupted in applause, and Mary Catherine felt surrounded by the warmth of a community that had embraced their union. The reception at the church hall was a joyous affair, with music provided by local musicians and food contributed by every family in attendance. Mary Catherine danced with her new husband while Timothy and Emma watched with obvious delight, already comfortable with the idea of Lucas as their permanent family member. "Any regrets?" Lucas asked quietly as they swayed to a gentle waltz. Mary Catherine looked around the room at her children laughing with other youngsters, at neighbors who had become friends, at the man who had promised to love and protect them all, and felt her heart swell with contentment. "None," she said honestly. "Only gratitude for how blessed we are." Their first year of marriage brought challenges that tested their new partnership in ways neither had fully anticipated. Merging two separate lives into one family required constant negotiation and adjustment, from the everyday logistics of managing a larger household to the deeper emotional work of building trust and intimacy. The Henderson place, now the Brennan homestead, buzzed with activity as they worked together to improve the property and establish their cattle operation. Lucas's years of experience as a ranch hand had taught him everything he needed to know about breeding, feeding, and marketing livestock, while Mary Catherine's practical skills proved invaluable in managing the domestic side of their expanding enterprise. "You have a natural head for the business side of ranching," Lucas observed one evening as they reviewed their account books. "Your record-keeping is better than most banks I've dealt with." Mary Catherine felt pride warm her chest at his praise. "Patrick always said I had a mind for numbers. I enjoy seeing how all the pieces fit together. Would you be interested in taking over more of the financial management? I'd rather spend my time with the cattle and land improvements, if you're willing to handle the books and correspondence." The trust implicit in his offer moved Mary Catherine deeply. Lucas was proposing to make her a true partner in their business, not just a helpmate who supported his decisions. It was a level of equality that many wives never achieved, and she didn't take the opportunity lightly. As spring arrived and their first full year of marriage progressed, Mary Catherine found herself settling into a role that felt both familiar and entirely new. She was still a mother, still a homemaker, but now she was also a business partner, a ranch manager, and a wife to a man who valued her opinions and relied on her skills. The children thrived under Lucas's steady guidance. Timothy, now 8, shadowed his stepfather around the ranch with eager determination to learn everything about cattle and horses. Lucas taught him to ride properly, to read weather signs, and to handle tools with the competence that would serve him well as a man. Emma, at 5, remained the family's sunshine, charming everyone she met with her bright chatter and fearless curiosity. Lucas treated her with the same gentle respect he showed Timothy, never dismissing her questions or suggesting that ranch work was inappropriate for girls. "She's going to be a force of nature when she grows up," Lucas observed one evening, as they watched Emma attempt to teach a patient old milk cow to follow her around the barnyard. "Like her mother," Mary Catherine said, then blushed at her own boldness. Lucas's smile was warm and appreciative, exactly like her mother. As their second winter together approached, Mary Catherine realized that what had begun as grateful affection had deepened into something much stronger. She loved Lucas, not the desperate, passionate love of youth, but the steady, mature love of a woman who understood that the best partnerships were built on friendship, respect, and shared purpose. "Lucas," she said one evening as they sat together on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold, "I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I love you," she said simply. "Not just as the man who saved us during the storm, or as Timothy and Emma's stepfather, or as my business partner. I love you as my husband, as the man I want to spend the rest of my life with." Lucas set down the harness he'd been mending and pulled Mary Catherine into his arms. "I love you too," he said against her hair. "More than I thought possible when I first asked you to marry me." "Are you happy?" Mary Catherine asked, echoing Emma's question from the previous year. "Truly happy with the life we've built?" "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Lucas replied honestly. "You and the children have given me everything I didn't know. I was missing purpose, family, a reason to build something that will last beyond my own lifetime." As winter settled over their ranch and they prepared for the challenges that the harsh season would bring, Mary Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. A dust storm that had threatened to destroy everything she'd worked for had instead delivered the greatest blessing of her adult life: a second chance at love, partnership, and happiness. The second major test of their marriage came during their third year together, when a severe drought threatened not just their livelihood but the survival of their entire community. Wells began to run dry, pastures withered to brown stubble, and cattle prices plummeted as ranchers across the territory were forced to sell their herds for whatever they could get. Mary Catherine watched their carefully managed savings account dwindle as they bought feed for their cattle and dug deeper wells in search of water. The financial stress tested their partnership in ways that the emotional adjustments of early marriage had not, forcing them to make difficult decisions about which investments to protect and which dreams to postpone. "We might have to sell the yearling herd," Lucas said one evening, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "I hate to do it when prices are so low, but we need the cash to keep the breeding stock alive." Mary Catherine studied their account books, calculating and recalculating their options. "What if we mortgaged the east pasture instead? The bank might be willing to extend credit against the land value, and that would let us keep the cattle until prices recover." Lucas looked at her with surprise and admiration. "That's a significant risk, Mary Catherine. If the drought continues much longer, we could lose everything. And if we sell the cattle now, we'll lose our foundation herd and have to start over from nothing when conditions improve," Mary Catherine pointed out. "Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all." The decision to mortgage part of their land to maintain their cattle operation proved to be the right choice when autumn rains finally broke the drought and cattle prices began to recover. But the months of uncertainty had shown Mary Catherine a new side of her husband: his willingness to include her in difficult decisions, his respect for her business judgment, and his grace under pressure. "I couldn't have gotten through this year without you," Lucas told her as they celebrated their first profitable sale since the drought began. "Your financial skills and your courage saved our ranch." "We saved our ranch," Mary Catherine corrected gently. "That's what partners do. They face challenges together and find solutions that neither could manage alone." Their children, now 9 and 6, had also risen to meet the challenges of the drought year. Timothy had taken on additional responsibilities around the ranch without complaint, and Emma had contributed by helping with the increased cooking and preserving that became necessary when money was tight. The crisis had strengthened their family bonds rather than straining them. As their fourth year of marriage began, Mary Catherine realized that she and Lucas had passed through the testing phases of their relationship and emerged as a truly united partnership. They'd faced nature's fury together, survived financial crisis, and proven that their love could withstand the pressures that destroyed weaker marriages. "I have something to tell you," Mary Catherine said, one spring evening as they worked together in the garden they'd expanded now that water was plentiful again. Lucas looked up from the tomato plants he was staking, noting something different in her tone. "What is it?" Mary Catherine felt nervous butterflies in her stomach as she prepared to share news that would change their family forever. "I'm going to have a baby." Lucas dropped his gardening tools and stared at her with an expression of wonder and joy that made Mary Catherine's heart soar. "Really? Are you sure?" "I'm sure," she said, laughing at his obvious delight. "Dr. Henderson confirmed it yesterday when I went to town." Lucas swept her into his arms, spinning her around the garden while she laughed and protested about being careful with the plants. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with tears of happiness. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby. Are you happy about it?" Mary Catherine asked. though his reaction had already answered her question. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Lucas replied, his hands gentle as they settled on her still flat stomach. A child that's ours together, it's like a blessing I never dared to hope for. The news of Mary Catherine's pregnancy was greeted with joy by Timothy and Emma, who had grown secure enough in their family's stability to welcome the idea of a new sibling. Timothy, now old enough to understand the basics of ranch management, declared that he would teach the baby everything about horses and cattle. Emma announced that she would help with feeding and diaper changing because she was an expert at taking care of things. The arrival of baby Daniel Patrick Brennan in late autumn marked a new chapter in their family's story. Named for both Mary Catherine's first husband and Lucas's father, the baby represented the blending of their histories into something entirely new and precious. Mary Catherine marveled at the sight of Lucas holding his son, this strong man who could handle the most stubborn bull reduced to gentle wonder by a tiny infant's grip on his finger. Timothy and Emma were equally enchanted by their baby brother, competing to help with his care and entertainment. "He looks like you," Mary Catherine observed one evening, as Lucas rocked the baby to sleep while humming an old lullaby. "He looks like himself," Lucas replied, but his proud smile suggested he was pleased by the comparison. Perfect and new and full of possibilities. The addition of baby Daniel to their household brought new challenges but also deeper joy than Mary Catherine had thought possible. Watching Lucas embrace fatherhood with such natural love and competence reminded her daily of how fortunate she'd been to find a second chance at family happiness. As their son's first winter passed and spring returned to the prairie, Mary Catherine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. 5 years ago, she'd been a struggling widow convinced that her best years were behind her. Now she was the mother of 3 thriving children, partner in a successful ranch, and wife to a man who loved her more completely than she'd ever thought possible. "Do you ever think about that dust storm?" she asked Lucas one evening as they sat on their porch, watching Timothy teach Emma to throw a rope while baby Daniel slept peacefully in her arms. "Every day," Lucas replied. "It was the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it felt like a disaster at the time. I was so scared," Mary Catherine remembered. "Scared of the storm, scared of being alone with the children, scared of what would happen to us. And I was just a lonely cowboy looking for shelter," Lucas added. "I had no idea I was about to find my whole future." Mary Catherine shifted baby Daniel to her other arm and reached for Lucas's hand. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been riding that direction, if you hadn't seen the storm coming. But I was, and I did," Lucas said firmly. "Some things are meant to be, Mary Catherine. We were meant to find each other, meant to build this life together." As the sun set over their prosperous ranch, painting the sky in the same gold and crimson shades that had marked so many significant moments in their relationship, Mary Catherine felt the deep contentment that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The dust storm that had once threatened to destroy everything she held dear had instead brought her the greatest gifts of her life: love, partnership, and a family that had grown from crisis into something beautiful and enduring. She'd learned that sometimes the most devastating challenges carried within them the seeds of unexpected blessings, and that the courage to accept help during life's storms could lead to happiness beyond imagination. 10 years had passed since the dust storm that changed everything, and Mary Catherine Brennan stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching her children play in the yard that had once been buried under feet of displaced soil. Timothy, now 17, was teaching 10-year-old Daniel the finer points of roping cattle, while 13-year-old Emma supervised baby Margaret, the daughter who had completed their family 3 years earlier. The ranch had prospered beyond their early dreams, growing from a modest cattle operation to one of the most successful spreads in the territory. Lucas's expertise with livestock and Mary Catherine's skill with business management had proven to be a formidable combination, allowing them to weather market fluctuations and expand their holdings through careful planning and calculated risks. But more than their material success, Mary Catherine treasured the family they had built together. Timothy had grown into a young man who combined Patrick's steady nature with Lucas's intuitive understanding of animals and land. Emma had inherited her mother's head for numbers along with her stepfather's gift for reading people and situations. Daniel was pure joy in motion, fearless and bright and devoted to his family. And baby Margaret was the princess of them all, charming everyone with her sunny disposition and obvious intelligence. "Planning to stand there daydreaming all afternoon?" Lucas asked, coming up behind Mary Catherine and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just thinking about how much has changed since that first storm," Mary Catherine replied, leaning back against her husband's solid strength. Do you remember how scared I was? I remember how brave you were, Lucas corrected. Taking in a stranger, trusting me with your children's safety, having the courage to build something new when you could have stayed safe in your grief. Mary Catherine turned in his arms to face the man who had become the center of her world. At 42, Lucas was still strong and vital, though silver now threaded his dark hair and laugh lines crinkled the corners of his gray eyes. The years had been kind to him, and to their marriage. I have something to tell you, she said, echoing words she'd spoken several times over the years, always with important news to share. Lucas's eyebrows rose with interest and just a hint of concern. Good news or challenging news? Good news, I think, though it might mean some adjustments for our family. Mary Catherine smiled at her husband's patient expression. I've been asked to run for the territorial school board. Mrs. Patterson thinks it's time we had a woman's voice in educational decisions, and she believes I have the experience and support to win. Lucas's face lit up with pride and excitement. That's wonderful, Mary Catherine. You'd be perfect for that role. You understand both the practical needs of families and the importance of good education. It would mean spending time away from the ranch, traveling to board meetings, taking on public responsibilities that might affect our family's privacy. And it would also mean using your intelligence and skills to benefit the entire territory, Lucas pointed out. I'm proud of you for being asked, and I'll support whatever decision you make. Mary Catherine felt the familiar warmth that always filled her when Lucas demonstrated his complete confidence in her abilities. The children might not understand why Mama needs to be away sometimes. The children will be proud that their mother is important enough to help shape their territory's future. Timothy's almost old enough to help more with ranch management. Emma loves taking responsibility for household organization. And Daniel and Margaret will benefit from seeing their mother as more than just a wife and mother. As if summoned by their conversation, their children began gathering on the porch for the evening meal that remained a cornerstone of their family life. Timothy and Daniel were dusty from their afternoon's work. Emma had flour in her hair from helping with dinner preparation, and Margaret toddled over to climb into Lucas's lap with the confidence of a child who had never doubted her welcome anywhere. What were you and Mama talking about? Emma asked with the directness that characterized all their children. Your mother has been asked to serve on the territorial school board, Lucas announced, his pride evident in his voice. It's a great honor and an important responsibility. Timothy looked up with interest. Does that mean you'd be helping decide what children learn in school? Among other things, yes, Mary Catherine confirmed. I'd be working to make sure schools throughout the territory have good teachers, adequate supplies, and curricula that prepare children for the future. That's important work, Timothy said seriously. You should do it, Mama. You've taught us more about practical skills and thinking than most teachers ever could, Emma nodded emphatically. And you already help families in our community when they have problems with their children's education. This would just be helping more families. Even young Daniel seemed to grasp the significance of the opportunity. Would you still be our Mama? Mary Catherine pulled her son into her arms. Always and forever, sweetheart. Being on the school board would just be one more way of taking care of children, not just our children, but all the children in our territory. As they shared their evening meal and discussed the practical implications of Mary Catherine's potential new role, she marveled at how far their family had come from that terrifying week in the storm cellar. They'd grown from a desperate widow with 2 frightened children and a lonely cowboy seeking shelter into a strong, confident family capable of contributing to their community's growth and development. I keep thinking about something you said during that first storm, Mary Catherine told Lucas later that evening, as they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of gold. What's that? You told the children that storms were tests, and that the land provided for people who were patient and worked hard. I think that dust storm was our test, and everything we've built since then is what the land provided. Lucas considered this thoughtfully. Maybe the storm wasn't really the test. Maybe the test was whether we'd have the courage to trust each other, to build something new together instead of staying safe and separate. Mary Catherine looked out over their prosperous ranch, at the children they'd raised together, at the community they'd helped build through years of hard work and mutual support. If that was the test, I think we passed with flying colors. We did more than pass, Lucas said, pulling her closer. We proved that sometimes the most devastating storms carry within them the seeds of the most beautiful futures. As night settled over the prairie and their children's voices drifted from inside the house where they were playing games and telling stories, Mary Catherine reflected on the unexpected paths that had led to this moment. She'd begun as a widow seeking merely to survive, and she'd discovered instead that she was capable of thriving, of loving again, of building something lasting and beautiful from the ashes of loss. The dust storm that had threatened to bury her world had instead revealed possibilities she'd never imagined. Lucas's courage in staying to help during the crisis had grown into a lifetime of partnership and love. Their gratitude for shared survival had blossomed into a promise for the future that had exceeded even their most optimistic dreams. Tomorrow she would accept the nomination for the school board, taking on new challenges and responsibilities that would stretch her abilities and contribute to their territory's development. But tonight, she was content to sit with her husband under the vast prairie sky, grateful for the storm that had brought them together and the love that had sustained them through every challenge since. The cowboy who had shielded her family from nature's fury had become the foundation of everything good in her life, and the widow who had accepted his help with desperate gratitude had become the woman confident enough to shape their territory's future. Together, they had proved that some storms, no matter how devastating they seemed, were really just the beginning of something beautiful.